Well, hello, creatives, community, kind folks out there. Hello. Welcome to this YouTube channel, RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and this week we will be talking, the notorious, the ubiquitous, the fearful, the horrible, the great, the legendary, uh, and somewhat unknown Underdark. Not just specifically the Underdark trademark of Forgotten Realms in the location where our most famous and vile dark elves, drow elves live, but we're going to literally talk just openly about subterranean adventures, whether it's from our typical medieval gaming all the way to, of course, Future Friday, where we will be talking about delving deep into probably asteroids and alien planets and deep down into the subsurface of the world. So today, good morning, everyone. Good morning from my side of the world. It's 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we go live at this time, UTC -4, um, uh, Monday through Friday. Now, I want to let everyone know that Tuesdays, Tips and Tricks Tuesdays, will on this channel will not be broadcasting as usual. I will be broadcasting from Fantasy Grounds College via voice and fingers crossed, hopefully video at Fantasy Grounds College as a guest speaker there. So this will only be Tuesdays, and it will be the exact same time. So with whatever time you're used to, if you would like to go over to the Discord channel at Fantasy Grounds College, that information is listed below this video. So if you want to check them out, that's fine. But yes, Tuesdays will be the only time that I will not be going live on my own channel. I will be going live in the Discord at Fantasy Grounds College. Just to let you know. Oh, Jonathan Crimes, I just switched channels. Okay. Willow Packer and the storyteller. Okay, there's a bunch of storytellers coming into the channel, which is actually a good thing. It's actually cool. All right, so let's begin. This week we're going to talk about subterranean environments, creatures, stories, world building, the whole nine yards. All right, so let's now, mind you, I bring this up because much like how I bring up some certain subjects like maelstroms was last week, storms and things and weather, and I believe that was by a Dead Man. And before that, I was on vacation, and we brought up like wetlands and such. A lot of times, this comes about from quite a bit of research. As you guys know, I'm writing the cinematic environments with Critical Hit Publishing, and one of the things that's really incredible is sometimes you can go down some of these, get lost down these rabbit holes, figuratively and literally, and you find a lot of information. So one of the things that really has really sparked me in terms of subterranean worlds and realms are just how vast and diverse, what a strange world there is that is below our feet. And that includes the spaces that are below rivers, lakes, oceans, etc., that are not necessarily aquatic, but they are still part of the ground. So if you were to take all of the moisture off of the earth, you would have, essentially like a planet like similar to Mars, where you have a lot of the ground, but you don't have any of the moisture, but you still have all of the earth formations and geological formations and such. But today is Monster Monday, and so we need to start talking about some of our favorite monsters, or maybe some of the monsters we haven't used very often, and things that we can do with them. And the one thing that really spoke to me was, how do these subterranean monsters basically, how do they sense, how do they move around, and how do they sense where they need to go? Okay, so one thing that's not very often promoted, but something I think you can really play with in terms of having subterranean creatures, is to decide whether they actually have any eyes at all. So are some of your subterranean creatures, are they blind? Do they just have short sight? and can't really see. From what I understand, for example, in the thumbnail, she took a thumbnail of a huge swarm of bats, and that many bats actually do have eyesight. They can see. That's just not their primary mode of um, of sensing the world around them. Just like us, our primary sense could, is conceivably our vision, but we do have other senses, and even if they're not as acute, or we haven't decided to use them to their highest acuity, subterranean creatures would be the same way. So you can decide whether creatures even have vision to begin with, or even have any eyes to begin with as well. And that might have a somewhat surprising and dramatic effect on some of your encounters, your monster encounters. So let's take an example. What's a really basic creature in your, I don't know, let's take a lizard man, right? Or you could go troglodyte, or any scaled creature, maybe bugbears, doesn't matter, right? Dead Man Storyteller says, brings up Daredevil. Daredevil's a perfect example of a character who is built around, I mean, of course, excellent martial artist. I love myself some Daredevil. I'm a fan of the Netflix show, and one of the things that that they point out with Daredevil is that despite the fact he doesn't have sight, all of his other senses are so acute that he's got like near superhuman balance and can detect things, heartbeats and motion in the air and perfect balance and heat and vibration. Despite the fact that the movie itself wasn't not necessarily the best, the Daredevil movie, Ben Affleck version of it, they gave him very much a bat-like sense, where he could hit his staff against a wall or a railing to create a vibration, and that vibration, much how bats do, they send out a signal, a sound, and that sound reflects and refracts off of solid objects, making like a three-dimensional image in his head. So could look around corners, and that three-dimensional image, of course, extends behind him, under his feet, above his head, and all 360 degrees, which could be pretty important, especially if you're roof running and such. And so a lot of creatures in the Underdark, I'm fully guessing, would have an extremely high sense, maybe like a sonar, or the a sonar direction or detection ability, much like how a bat or even some aquatic creatures, where they send out a signal or a sound like a ping of sorts that refracts off of the solid objects and comes back. Now there are benefits and limitations to all of that, right? So if we go back to our lizard man, if your lizard man has, let's just say that the lizard man just has bad eyesight, right? Milky eyes, but just it doesn't really do that. Really goes by maybe scent, looking out their tongue and sensing for something, right? Yeah, Rickard says tremor sense or echolocation. Yeah, the thing is, I think we can really play with that. Tremor sense is perfect, especially if your lizard creatures are completely blind, milky eyed, which is kind of cool, because on one hand, follow me on this, right? On one hand, maybe one of your players is like an arcane trickster or an illusionist or something. If you are primarily a visual illusion creator, it's going to be useless on a blind creature, right? I mean, even tremor sense and echolocation, sonar, is going to go right through an illusion. They're just going to ignore it, for good or bad. On the other hand, maybe someone with like thunder wave or audio illusions, or using a prestidigitation and thaumaturgy, could create sounds, or even wild shape, creating sounds that could throw them off, whereas visually they may not be able to detect those illusions. So again, we're going, and this is something I love, we're going into DM fiat here, right? This is like gaming table session 0. Like, would this work? Would it not work? How, how close to reality are we getting? How gritty are we going to get? How cinematic? And I think you can really play with it. And I think challenging the players and ourselves to figure out new methods of getting around problems, I think is actually a good thing. I don't think it's a nerfing thing. Although I'm sure a lot of players wants to hear me say, yeah, blind creature's completely immune to your illusion characters. Like, you're just nerfing my character. We don't want to go there. Yeah, Rickard says, problem with Tremor Sense is that it kills your rogue players' sneak. Echolocation could still work as long as they stand still for the pulse to go back and forth, but even then it might kill sneak. Well, remember that yes, but the rules still work, right? I think it's just a matter of us wrapping our heads around something else. Like, for example, is it about being quiet or is it about distraction, right? Maybe the rogue character, once they realize a creature has tremor sense, maybe the rogue crosses a rope, or like he balances on the rope and remains above the ground, whereas maybe the tremor sense of these particular, let's go back to the lizardmen, right? The lizardmen have tremor sense and they're completely blind. So they're touching the ground, feeling vibrations in the earth, but maybe the rogue is like going hand over fist crossing a rope, and that rope is above the ground and they're not able to sense it. Or someone carries with them a small pouch with stones in it, and they throw the stones to make a sound or to hit against the wall. Or maybe the dwarven party or something uses hammers to make like a rhythmic thrumming sense against the earth, so that other dwarves could sneak around behind these creatures or something. So it's not a matter. I do agree that on the surface, yeah, it would just kill that. But if we get more creative with what's going on and how these creatures live in the Underdark, how are their sentient civilizations down in the Underdark, I think we could start to have some fun with it and think outside our box and go, oh, you know what would be great? If we float, my character has a yeah, I'm going to get back in the chat too. I hear you guys. But like, if my character has a floating disc spell, can I carry two of my party members and they only think one of us is coming down the path instead of like three of us, right? Well, yeah, I DM, or I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Go for it, right? Willow Packer says, sense question: do creatures with blind sight suffer from a spell that grants inaudibility instead of invisibility? I homebrew an inaudibility spell for current game, and yes, slow clap on that one. Yeah, absolutely. Rickard says the rule specifically states it kills sneak. Oh, really? Oh, I guess you're screwed then. Well, I'm of a different mind, that it's that rule of cool thing, right? If a player comes up with a method to sneak around tremor sense, because tremor sense is specifically tied to the earth. Of course, if you're underground, pretty much everywhere you're touching is the earth. I think you could get around it. I think somebody, the group creates enough sonic disruption or vibration in the earth, much like the pulse generators in the sci-fi book series and movie series Dune, where they summoned up the giant worms and the sonic pulses draw them towards particular areas. The pulses, it may be that it's not that you're sneaking, but there's something else that's drawing their attention that's more important than the character who's sneaking around, right? It's like, yeah, they know you're there, they just have no interest in going after you, which in and of itself, it's kind of like hiding in plain sight, right? I'm not a ninja, but if I dress in a uniform that makes me look like I belong there, I don't need to sneak past anyone. I can just blend into the environment. So that it's essentially it's the rule of cool, right? Yeah, your sneak is sucks unless you come up with a good idea, in which case I'm like, yeah, I'm all for it, right? Yeah, Dead Man the Storyteller says AD&D second edition had an inaudibility spell in one of their supplements. And again, the silence spell, yeah, the cleric that you're like, yeah, that spell sucks, might be really, really important down in the Underdark. I mean, a silence spell could operate exactly as like a blindness to some of these creatures as well, which is another great way of doing it. Although a very intelligent sentient creature would be able to detect the zone of soundlessness, which in and of itself wouldn't make you disappear, and it would throw them off, but it would definitely let them know that there's something completely wrong. But I like that. Rickard says, "Oh, I agree with you. Sneaking is not just moving quietly or hiding in the shadows or whatnot. It's getting from point A to B without being noticed by any means, distractions or otherwise." Yeah. It goes on to say the rogue adopts a movement pattern that fits an Underdark critter that the monster is uninterested in. Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure there's going to be a player who's like, "Hey, if we kill what's a good creature? If we kill the cave fisher, can I use its shell and hide under its shell to sneak past to something or something, or hide in a crevice or something?" Like, that's pretty nasty, but yeah, go for it, right? So there is that as well. If you like you said, take on the pattern of something, maybe speech patterns, the movement patterns like the steps of the feet, the way they sound, maybe the way their claws scratch against the earth or something, or wild shaping yourself or mimicking the sounds. Yeah, that works as well, especially when it comes to the idea of standing still, and then maybe the creatures are like sensing something, and maybe they only sense motion, which is something you can play with as well. Maybe if you're standing completely still, the creatures could care less. When there's motion, they go after it as like a predatory effect. um, Willow Packer goes on to say, on killing Sneak, blind sight has a limited range, unless usually less than 60 feet. That's less than most full dashes for rogues. It also might not reach the ceiling. And see, here we go. We're playing, and I love playing with this, right? Everyone has this there's a general feeling that dark vision ruins the idea of being in the dark. And my contention is yes, but no, right? 60 feet it, above ground, 60 feet is not very long. Now, when you're in your subterranean caverns and dungeons and tight spaces and things, which we're going to go over on Thursday, but when you're in those places, if you have a location that's 60 feet further than you can see, all of anything beyond that 60-foot distance is in complete darkness. And 60 feet is not a lot of space if you're in a 300-foot huge cavern, right? And like Willow Packer says, it might not reach the ceiling. You won't be able to see all the way down certain pits. You may be able to hear what's going on, but you're not going to be able to see what's going on. And could you imagine being attacked by, again, a horde of blind albino lizardmen coming out of the darkness, but you can't count how many there are because you have no idea what's beyond that 60-foot range? And in the Underdark, remember, especially natural creatures, natural predatory creatures, just as tigers and hyena and things, wolves and coyotes attack in packs. It's possible that creatures in the Underdark are quite aware of, if they use dark vision as well, to remain out of sight, right? They know that if they get within a particular range of something, that they're going to be detected, and there might be things staying out of sight. And of course, we're going to have to get into the ability to tunnel through the earth too, which is its own problems as well. But right now, we're just talking about senses, and you see how kind of convoluted it can get, and a little problematic and stuff. But I personally, I love it. I think you could even go so far as to, if you feel some of these senses are a little bit too OP for how they operate, you could manipulate them into cones or rays instead of radii. So a creature may have a cone of tremor sense or echolocation in front of them, but maybe not on their sides or behind them. And it could be stimulated by other things too, as well. Like, brought up the fact that lizardmen having an acute sense of smell and taste may default to that use when they're not defaulting to their eyesight, and various other mix and matching that you can do for some of your creatures. Um, Uno dos, Undo says, not only do the monsters sense differently, the characters do as well. If they can't rely on their sight, they will often smell and hear, and sometimes feel the monster before they actually see it. And what a great way for your players to start like immersing themselves into your Underdark, your subterranean world, right? If they can't see, let's say they blow their torches out and the players are like, oh my God, we're not going to be able to see around here. But then they start to feel the earth, and they can feel the vibrations in the earth. And being like an aquatic environment, our subterranean environment is 360. So things could be moving above them in the earth, below them in the earth, behind walls, thin or thick, and that might allow them to navigate in a way that they might not have even imagined beforehand, right? If your players are like, you know what, I'm just going to put a blindfold on. What's the point in carrying around this torch and my staff that's always glowing with my light spell? I'm just giving away my location. Although on the other hand, blind creatures aren't going to be able to sense a bright light anyway, so you won't be able to blind them. They won't see your light coming around the corners. So and stacking some of these things might have, sorry guys, stacking some of these things might come up with some very convoluted but interesting encounters. The big bad can see perfectly well in the dark. The lizard man, the albino lizard salamander creatures don't. So that might be an interesting thing if the PCs think they're going to encounter someone or something that can't be recognized. You know, Deadman and Storyteller says Obi-Wan imitating a Kryat dragon in Star Wars. I don't remember that one. Was that like in a? Tatooine. Yes, when he came around the corner and made the noise, and the Tusken Raiders ran off, and and Luke is just like, what's going on? And then you see Obi-Wan come across the crest the ridge, right? It was, it's possible these. I don't know much about Tusken warriors or whatnot. I guess it doesn't really matter. But again, a player coming up with a way of mimicking. What's a dangerous animal? I love myself some boulets, right? Land sharks, the bullets, which are probably pretty horrible creatures in the Underdark and subterranean realms. But if you can mimic their sounds or their motion or their patterns in how they dig through the earth and just duplicate that sound, you probably get some pretty soiled pants, I think, out of some of your adversaries, right? Those blind lizard folk that seem to be able to sneak up on the PCs and can see through all their illusions, and the rogue, and then when the bard is like, hey, I can duplicate this sound, hey, that there you go, passing around the spotlight again. Pelora says the evolutionary arms race to get the longest range dark vision. Yeah, you could blind them if they use heat vision of some form, which is another thing too. Dead man, please inform us. If I'm not mistaken, I believe in second edition and even third that there was more than one option for having a dark vision. As it is now in fifth edition, dark vision is essentially operates very much like what we would consider night vision goggles for special forces, right? It takes true darkness and dim light and just ramps up the vision into black and white. But there isn't any thermal vision, which is another way to modify some of your blind sight abilities. So blind sight is pretty, as written in the rules, is very not vague, but is undescribed. So what is it that gives a creature blind sight? Is it a psychic awareness? Is it this? Is it the sonar echolocation? Is it some kind of thermal vision? That kind of thing. Undo says dark vision is also black and white and making it pretty easy for creatures to camouflage. Exactly. As a matter of fact, and I'm gonna pick with you guys here a little bit. because it's black and white, right? It's just black and white. Maybe, yeah, I would even go grayscale, right? I'll grant that. I'll give you some grayscale. If you see a pool of fluid in front of you, how do you know what it is if you cannot smell it, right? You would have to get close to it. So a pool of fluid could be blood, water, oil, acid. It could be it could be anything, and unless you can use some other method to detect what it is, tasting it, touching it, whatever, smelling it, you're not going to know. It could be a 30-foot pool of, I don't know, grayish liquid. It's dripping from the ceiling. What do you do? I don't know. I'm going to go over and taste it. Okay. You just tasted a gray ooze, or you just tasted uh, tar or oil, or maybe it's clean water, or it's blood dripping from the ceiling. Like, you wouldn't know. So, yeah. Black and white, like grayscale, hides colors, and those colors might be important, especially if you PCC dragon underground. What color is it? A gray dragon? I don't. You don't know. It could be a red dragon or blue dragon. You have zero idea until he opens his mouth and blasts you. Willow says, "In the darkness, there are only shades of gray." Anyway, right, and so those now again. Some of the things we're bringing up, like, you might not want to hit your players over the head with it, but I think interacting with it is pretty interesting, especially with it would be rather humorous that the PCs bring with them light sources, in which case they could see shades of color that none of the creatures in the Underdark can tell. And those shades of color might be important, whereas the creatures underground are like, I don't care what color it is. I put it in my house and put up on a shelf. It looks good. And the PCs are like, it's purple. That means the so-and-so purple. I don't know. It could be items stolen from the surface world. And, the royal color of purple is very important. And they're just like, I have no idea. It's purple. I just like it. Dead Man says third edition had dark vision, like night vision goggles, like two-tone, and night vision, which was full color. I didn't realize. Okay, yes. So dark vision was like the two-tone, black and white, grayscale kind of thing, and night vision was full color. Now, here's another point of contention that you guys brought up, and I think this is pretty important when it comes to like the Underdark and subterranean realm, is that dark vision has a particular range. And I already brought up the fact that, ceilings, pits, seeing completely across an open, a very large open area, you only have a certain distance that you can see. So attacks launched out of a distance, like arrows and bolts and slingshots and things, once they get into that 60-foot range, are dangerous and can take cover, but you may not know where they're coming from. So we played with that. But the other idea too is that along with the grayscale, it only, in 5th edition, it only alters the light sourcing up one level. Let me be more specific, that dim light becomes regular light and full darkness becomes dim light. Now, you would say, well, if you have a dwarven culture, or you have your drow elven empire, that there's no reason for them to ever use illumination because, well, they all have dark vision, right? Well, I would tend to both agree and disagree. And the reason, because in full darkness, when it moves to dim light, you still have penalties on perception and other things. And especially if there's a place if you're doing very tight manual dexterity things, sewing clothing, building objects, writing letters and stuff, I think you're still going to need some form of illumination, whether it's like very dim glowing moss or lichen that grows on the walls, or small stones that glow. Of course, for us normal humans, it's terrible. We'd be squinting the whole time, and our eyes would be tearing up after hours of this. But for them, they would still need some form of illumination for very fine manual work. And of course, if they're defending their own empires, they're going to want as much illumination as possible, because if they're in total darkness, they have the same limitation, i.e., dim light, as of seeing their enemies as their enemies have and sneaking past them. So a dwarven, as you get closer to maybe a large dwarven city, there probably will be gemstones that are cast dim light out, because once that dim light is cast, it bumps them up to full daylight vision. But that dim light for us humans, we might see that over a distance or going down maybe worn paths or something, so that they can see enemies sneak up to them instead of having that disadvantage on their limitation on their perception. Yeah, Undo says also, if I remember correctly, I think dark vision still have penalties to perception. Now here's a Dead Man said dwarves had night vision, drow had dark vision. In third edition, yeah. Yeah, dwarves. Wow, I didn't realize dwarves had the night vision, the color, full color, and that the drow had the dark vision. I didn't realize that. I would have figured it would have been reversed, but I mean, I guess you can't give the drow elves, or drow, if you want to pronounce it that way, you can't give the dark elves everything. I mean, they darn near had everything at one point. So, all right. So now we have ourselves. There's a certain limit distance that they can see, and of course, if you have a worn path that has these things that cast dim light for the Underdark creatures, placing them in their 60-foot distances between each other would allow them to see very far. They could see for miles if you had a straight path, something casting light that overlaps the next thing that casts light, so on and so forth. So while defensively, I'm sure there would be maybe their tapestries, or defensively, maybe they throw tarps over top of I don't know, glowing lichen inside of jars, or glowing stones, or even light spells that they have on their uniforms or something like that, sticking with the Drow Empire thing, right? They may have a hand signal, and then everyone drops the tarps over the light so no one can see. I could very much imagine that. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there was an R.A. Salvatore, Robert Salvatore novel in which one of the drow were using heat vision or thermal vision, and had a small disc with like leather on one side and a metal stone on the other in the palm of their hand. I'm holding up my hand for those who are seeing me, but the idea was to blow on it or rub it and make it warm, and then they would flick their hand using like a Morse code style of communication. So you make a warm, you get something warm, you heat it up, you hide it behind something that's cool, and then you just flick the warmness over and over in the dark towards another area, which of course we know that the drow have a type of hand sign language / Morse code as well in the Underdark, which of course would be very effective as well, especially if you have a group of scouts or something doing the same thing, hot and cold, and also body language and use of the hand signals and such. I can imagine that as well. While we're talking about this, they could even manipulate their own senses or the senses of other creatures by putting things in locations as either barriers, or to track them, or to lead down a path. For example, a creature with a heightened sense of smell, the PCs or the native peoples could mark certain turns and twists in this 3-dimensional subterranean realm, so that maybe their mounted lizards that they ride on can sniff their way back home, or what have you. We can even do the same thing with sounds and such. So yeah, I think you really play with this. Rickard says, turning this around, angler fish style. Light is used to lure creatures close in the deep ocean. Why not in the Underdark? Could work both ways, luring monsters to PCs and luring PCs to monsters. Hell yeah. Yeah, why not? Why wouldn't they? That's one of the primary ways, like a will-o-wisp lures their prey to a certain area where there's like colored lights in the distance, or a soft glow, or something of that nature, leading things around corners. I could imagine a huge creature with like you said, the angler with the tiny little light dangling off of their mouth and hiding in the earth and such. And of course, we're talking subterranean and Underdark, there are so many. I'm just giving a hint because we'll talk about this on Thursday, but I'm sure it's going to come up before then as well. But everything doesn't necessarily need to be on a flat plane, and I would behoove you not to do that, especially if it's rough, if there are rough caverns, as well as the fact that all of Earth is not the same, right? There's granite, and there's so okay. I could not even make a list of all of the types of Earth and the condition that those Earths are in. So, for example, like the anglerfish style creature could have a small little orb dangling off of its head, but it might be down in a sand dune or under soft, muddy earth or in a lake of water that the PCs only see in grayscale, and they might be thinking it's made of acid or something. Right? It could be dangling off the ceiling, hiding in the ceiling, and dangling its light down. And of course, we have ourselves different types of like soda straws and stalactites and stalagmites. Really, DBJ. It's stalactites. Yeah, stalactites and stalagmites. Uh yeah. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's the and they can come in different sizes too. They can they can span, they could just be small puddles of a small stone that are just dipping down from the ceiling all the way up to these 100-foot tall pillars that have attached to themselves holding up the ceilings and such. So absolutely. Rickard goes on to say, working on the will-o-wisp thing, you could have a symbiotic relationship between such a creature and another. So the light casting one is harmless, but they lure things to the dangerous one. Of course. You know what? I love BFF creatures. The best friend creatures, the teaming up, the symbiotic relationship, whether it doesn't even necessarily need to be one of a verbal like handshake. It could just be one leading the other. So okay, so let's go with the will-o-wisp, right? They lead, they don't want to be harmed. They lead, the dwarven scouts down in the Underdark, right? So the dwarves are going around, they're looking for different veins of ore. They see a glow in the distance. Maybe even they think they're enemies. Maybe they think the glow are drow raiding party. So they go to sneak closer, and the will-o-wisps lead them over puddles of ooze or I don't know, those blind lizard folk or troglodytes that are hanging there, or any number of traps, either naturally formed, like the will-o-wisp just know that, hey, whenever living creatures walk in this area, they get stuck in like a gelatinous ooze that's below them, or it could literally be sentient blind lizard folk that are like, they just have a relationship with the will-o-wisp. They never really talked about it. It just works for them. They start killing their dwarven enemies, and the will-o-wisps go and absorb the life out of a couple of them. The lizard people take the other ones, and that's the thing. Maybe the will-o-wisps just live in this cavern and they have a quid pro quo relationship, which I love. I love that kind of thing. It's the idea of zombies carrying inside of them like snakes or rot grubs or a hive of killer insects or something, right? It's working them together on purpose or not. Rickard says, PC number one, hey, if we catch that luminous moth, we can use it for light. PC two, good idea, let's go after it. Yeah. Yeah, right. It's like, yeah, we can use that for light, like for a light source. Yeah, you might not want to do that. Although, you could go a little overboard with it and make everything dangerous, but it would be rather funny that the last 3 light sources were pretty no problems. You just went got some beetles. There's a Dungeons and Dragons beetle that glows on the back. I think it's just a fire beetle or something. That might be a type of light source that the PCs can find and such, after they of course kill the beetles and I think take out the little glowy thing off their beetle shell or whatever it is. But then eventually they're like, we need another light source. Let's go after it. It's a swarm of will-o-wisps and some other creatures there. Yeah. Rickard says, PC number 3. Yeah, good idea. Monster says, idea good. PC number 1. Who said that? Oh, hilarious. Now we talked about different we talked about different senses and manipulating those senses and how can you sense things, but remember there are ways to circumvent some of those things, becoming incorporeal, gaseous form, wild shape would have a big difference in that. There, changing the shape. Of course, we talked about illusionary audio events, illusionary sense of smell and taste, which maybe that might be a new thing for like an illusionist, arcane trickster character to start learning some new, finding out how things work in the Underdark and then using that as illusions to make yourself smell different or sound different, or sound like there's more of you, or sound like you're throwing the sound of yourselves to another location might be another thing. Now let's start to get into some of the spaces and some of the travel in the Underdark. Okay, so now mind you, the Underdark itself, let's just get this clear. The Underdark itself, trademark, is part of Forgotten Realms and owned by WotC, and it is in and of itself its own world. You could almost, some people have even almost made it its own plane of existence. It has its own ecology, and so there's nothing to say that your own world and your own Underdark or Underlands or whatever the case, whatever you want to name it, would have its own ecology. But we can start to play with that too, in terms of plant life, in terms of other things underground. For example, despite the fact that the temperature underground is regularly normal, there are still lots of variations, whether it comes from air currents. We still have the other elements. Other than Earth, we still have air, fire, and water down under the ground. So depending on how deep you are into the Earth, you could still have frozen landscapes. You can have strong winds and passages that blow gusts of winds or very powerful winds, even cold winds and such. You have yourselves volcanic regions that have pressure, that are pushing pressure to get upwards. You have geological events where tectonic plates are moving against each other and such. So you can play with a ton of other things underground in terms of, using aquatic creatures or Arctic creatures or desert creatures in your underworld regions, just based on the geological effects. So Rickard goes to say, so being the Underdark, lots of psionics going around. You could have a hive mind moss growing around the area that sees collectively. Yeah, you're getting a little dark there, which might be a way of you describing a type of blind sight, right? Or tremor sense. Like you could just reskin it as psychic awareness, which on its surface sounds pretty powerful, right? A powerful mind, like you're talking about, like a hive mind moss that air quotes sees everything, but maybe it can't see things like Gear Forged or War Forged or zombie, like something without a mind that is not sentient. So maybe it can only sense sentient minds, and maybe that ability to sense things it penetrates Earth, but it doesn't navigate through the Earth. So it could sense a mind 30 feet away, but doesn't sense the 30 feet of rock between both of those creatures, if I'm trying to be clear. Rickard goes on to say, if the PCs or a monster has psychic powers, they might be able to jack in to the moss as a sort of surveillance camera system. Ooh, I like that. That's a little bit of getting a little heisty there. I like heists, and I like the idea of this mossy like network. It could be cultivated by underworld druidic of people. Let's go back to our Dwarven Empire, right? There may be these druidic cults. Not cult might not be the right thing. Maybe it's just a normal method of how they tend to this mossy type garden, but then maybe the PCs are like, that's not really a garden. They're not eating it. It could be something that they are tending to, or they could be enslaved by a powerful hive mind to spread this moss around, or like a yellow musk creeper, maybe there are undead creatures that are infected by this moss, so it's more plant-like undead, and they're undead automaton walking around the under realm. When they die, they just collapse into these like patches of moss that all link together back to like a central system or something. And you could ramp it up. Is it still alive? Is it sentient in the sense that it can actively defend itself, or is it just a natural part of the environment too? It could be that there are powerful minds who can basically jack into it, and it just happens to be a network. It's just, hey, I know what's happening 8 miles ahead, 3 miles down beneath us through this wild twisty thing by just touching the moss and jacking in and using and taking over the surveillance system that's in the Underdark. I love it. I love it so much. As a matter of fact, there may even be patrols that might carry this like mossy, maybe there's like a rod or a staff with this like mossy orb on the top of it, and or they're carrying it on a pouch or something, and they just basically put their hands on top of it and close their eyes, and they jack into it, and it allows them to see other areas where the moss is at. It could border. The moss could grow around like an archway, and each archway is linked to a defense system, so they can send out patrols to make sure that their cities aren't being attacked, because all of the mossy covered openings are there. So yeah, man, you really go pretty far with it. Now again, we haven't really talked about the movement of creatures, the tunneling ability. And Rickard said could have it so that the moss has a central hub. So if you have a cutting of the central moss, it allows you to jack in. Yeah, that's and what a great way, what a great mission, right? It's a get the MacGuffin mission, right? The fetch quest where the PCs kind of have to sneak past. They have to sneak past the system to get, like you said, like a central cutting, like a person who cuts a frond off of a flower to get that central core, steal it, and then now they have the ability to use that system against their enemies, which I'm all for it. And of course, maybe that central mass isn't on the ground. The PCs get there and they look up in the sky and they're like, that's like, is that like 100 meters above us? And then the American one's like, yeah, that's like 300 feet. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's like, oh shoot, I didn't think about that. It's like growing off the ceiling, and maybe there's like catwalks and ropes and rope bridges and people dangling off of stuff, tending to it and making sure that it's all right. And they're like, yeah, how are we going to get up there? So, which brings me to the 360-degree version of our Underdark world, right? When creatures have the ability to tunnel, they don't have to tunnel like they would on the surface world, right, where it's underneath your feet. They can tunnel through walls, from ceilings, reaching down, grabbing up, coming across. Now, I'm working on, or have been working on, rules for this, because the method of tunneling isn't quite, it's not detailed to the point where there are some questions that PCs and game masters and dungeon masters are going to have when a tunneling creature does something that other non-tunneling creatures in the way might want to take effect on. Deadman says that warlocks from Marvel have the one guy who can make his own psychic surveillance system. I remember he was blind. I remember the character, and Oracle? Was there another character named Oracle before I know DC has an Oracle character who's in a wheelchair, but I can't remember. But yes, you're right. There, in the Underdark, we have a lot ourselves, a ton of psychic creatures other than ourselves, our mind flayers, our illithids. So granting some of those psychic abilities to some of those creatures is possible. And mind you, you don't need, yes, you can buy or look up or, find some kind of like psionics handbook or whatever, but you can just reskin a ton of spells and such, right? Like there's a message spell and just call it psychic. You could make up your own classification of spells, just picking spells off of the entire spells available to you, put them in their own categories, pick a bunch of cantrips, pick a bunch of first level, pick a bunch of second level that fit into a quote unquote psychic spellcaster category and make your own and just call it that. So you could snatch them from with some clerical abilities like Zone of Truth or Command or it's tip of my tongue, Sleep Spell combined with Vicious Mockery, and you could change Vicious Mockery to something else and call it, it does psychic damage, call it something else, reskin it, rename it. And so you can make up your own psychic spellcasters in your Underdark, and maybe some of your PCs who are like tangential to psychic abilities, a PC that uses some kind of mind affecting ability like Sanctuary or something might alert or call upon or jack into this system by accident, and that'd be kind of cool as well. But along the ideas of tunneling and stuff, I mean, you could have a tentacled creature that can tunnel through the earth and reach down and grapple some of your like a cave fisher reaching down and grappling some of your PCs and drawing them up into the air. You have you have yourself your floating creatures. Of course, we have beholders, but there's other creatures that kind of levitate and float, and they may live in a hive-like location where it's not easy for the PCs to climb or scale up high, but these creatures live above. I believe it was even described this way in some of the R.A. Salvatore novels, where the royal families of the Drow elves lived. They lived in these multi-leveled stalactites. Yes, stalactites are above, stalagmites are below. So they lived in hollowed out stalactite havens, castles, or whatever, and the lower folk lived below because they couldn't fly. But the Drow, who could levitate naturally, would levitate upwards into their homes, which didn't have any steps. So even their servants who managed their properties above in the stalactites could not go from level to level. They just lived in one area and handled that. So the private rooms or bedrooms or something, they couldn't. Well, they could reach it, but they couldn't reach it very easily. And of course, if you were found in a place you shouldn't be, they knew that you snuck up there, right? So you can play with that and as play with the idea of using height as well as length in a subterranean realm and natural caves. You can just go YouTube and type in people who explore caves. There is no rhyme or reason as far as caves go. Lots of tight spaces, ducking your head, needing to take off that plate mail armor to slip through certain tight spaces. The risk of the stone collapsing, being in a place that's flooding with water. Aquifers are another thing that are a big problem as well. A pocket of water in the trapped in the earth, and where your PCs are at in relationship to an aquifer. So, for example, you could have an underground lake. PCs are on a boat. They're in an underground lake. They could go over a waterfall. Maybe the rest of the dungeon is underneath this underground lake with just dripping water coming from the ceiling. And the PCs understand that, like, wow, there's a whole lake community above us and we're underneath it. All it would take is one depth charge, one explosive charge to set this off and flood everything below us, right? There's a possibility of doing that as well. Even navigating in a straight line, unless there's a vast major empire that's carved out these very straight or flat regions with wagons or like maybe mine shafts or something like that. If no sentient hand has formed it, you're not going to be able to travel in straight lines. And so switchbacks, dead ends, um, hidden locations, sensing air movement using a candle in a dead end area and looking to see if you could sense air flowing from a crack in the wall, being able to know the difference by putting your hand against the wall, whether it's only 2 inches or 2 feet or 20 feet of rock between you and where you need to get to, are issues as well. Any number of cave-ins and pitfalls and stuff are available as well. And so your creatures that live in this under dark realm might use that to their advantage as well, especially the the will-o-wisps that are working with the blind lizard men could lead a party of lost dwarven natives into an area where they lose their footing to fall into a pit to be attacked by the blind lizard men using poison darts from the poison from nectar that grows off the moss that is linking them to a psychic network while they're working with will-o-wisps, and some other creature that's part of the psychic network realizes that they have more people trapped down in a pit or something, right? Willow says, night guys, I gotta hit the sack. That's all right. Have a very good evening. We will see thee later. We've come upon the hour mark. Thank you guys for joining me. We will continue our talk this week about the Underdark and about subterranean travel. I mean, just us talking about super senses or using senses beyond sight, can really change how the PCs interact with the things you have underground. Now, tomorrow, I will be bringing this up, but I will be broadcasting from Fantasy Grounds College. I will be doing I'm like a guest speaker. I'll be doing an auditory thing. I'm basically going there, broadcasting from there, doing what I'm doing. We are in the midst of trying to figure out how to both broadcast from there and then onto my channel, or record it and then put it on the channel. We'll figure it out. But they invited me. I guess they like me some kind of way. I guess I bring some kind of positive energy, and I'm an old man. I've been in this for quite a while, so I hope we're doing a little quid pro quo. I'm a newbie. I'm extremely noob. So yeah. Undo says Veins of the Earth is a good RPG book that deals with the underground adventuring. Veins of the Earth. I'll look that up. Rickard says, you up and about again, or you still on medication? No, I'm on naproxen, double shots of cortisone in both ankles, and I now have ankle braces, like solid ankle braces and stuff. I've got my fingers crossed, man. I've got 7 to 8 years before I get to retire. So yeah, I'm here in the States, I'm known as a letter carrier for the Postal Service. Although in other countries, I'm probably a postal carrier for the letter service. Whatever the case may be, that's what I do. I do not have a vehicle where I just drive all day. I have to get out of the vehicle and deliver the mail, what we call park and loop, essentially. I do have to get out of the vehicle, put the mail in a bag, and then walk. So it's pretty rough. And my seniority, I've been in for 26, 27 years, but the area I want to go to, you still have to have 20 plus years, 30 years before an opening, and still you got to wait for somebody to retire. So yeah. So thank you for asking. Maybe a little too much information. Give it away, but yeah. I'm doing pretty good. I'm feeling good. if not for the medications and stuff as well. Don't want to get addicted. Here, Central Ohio, we're like the opioid capital of the U.S. or something like that. So it's crazy. So yeah, not I don't want to be too high on meds, pain meds, but yeah. So I'm doing okay. So thank you very much for asking. Again, tomorrow won't be going live on this channel. I will be going live same time, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, UTC -4 as they use that method over at Fantasy Grounds College. They do have a Discord channel. Rickard says, also, when's the Patreon happening? I gotta send it live. I've got it open. It's thank you for reminding me about that. I guess maybe it's one of those like I don't know if anyone's even bothering wants to be part of this kind of thing. So now that you mentioned it, I will open it. Maybe not right now, but tonight, tomorrow, something like that. Here this week, here in the States, we have 4th of July celebration. So there will be holiday. I will be putting up videos anyway, but that's a big deal here. So that is an added complication if you're interested in partaking in certain things here or on the interwebs when it comes to the US, because 4th of July is a big deal here. So guys, everyone have a great evening. I will be posting up the link over to Fantasy Grounds. If you want to, Fantasy Grounds College, two separate things, not Fantasy Grounds College, but they are related, much like D&D Beyond is related to WotC's Dungeons and Dragons. Same quid pro quo relationship they have. So, it's an opportunity. Deadman says, and you need to link the FGC Discord in your doobly-doo. You are absolutely correct. I'm going to update that right now to put that into the doobly-doo, because I think I just have their .net website, but they're primarily a Discord service. So I'll do that right now. Thank you very much, Deadman. I will improve that. Guys, thank you very much. Expect that in another 5 minutes, and then I will post. As if you get a notification for another video, I will also post that where I'll be, and we're just going to see. I don't know anything about Fantasy Grounds, but they want me to join them, so I think this is just an opportunity for me to learn what they're doing. Virtual tabletop. There's a number of virtual tabletops. I know that they have everything from different. They don't just have 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. They have licensing with like Fate, 1st through 5th edition. They have Starfinder. They have other things. So Fantasy Grounds is very much like a grab bag of different licensing abilities for them. So that we'll see. I'm cautious because I feel like I'm the noob. I'm the invader. So I'm a little nervous, a little cautious, but I'm a positive kind of dude. So I'll go over there and do what I can. Rickard says you can also make custom rule sets. If hard to make deeper stuff, yes, you can. As a matter of fact, from what I understand, you can make macros, basically like mathematical macros. So you can they have built into it certain rule sets. So for example, if you make up your own game that uses 3d8 as a die mechanic, you can add in a 3d8 die mechanic into your own rule set, or you can modify a rule set. For example, you could modify armor class to be damage reduction kind of thing, that kind of stuff. Ricker says, if you ever get time to spare when I'm around, I'd be glad to run a game or two. Ooh, I'm gonna take you up on that. I think I will. All right, let me get out of here. I got to get to work, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. I will post the information down in the doobly-doo, and guys, I will see probably when if you're YouTube exclusive, don't fret. I'll be here Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So, guys, have a great one. I will see you later. Bye. All right.